that's the question that we're posing today. I'm Conway.
And I'm Victoria Holt.
We're joined today by Andy and Darsh, who are going to be our moderators. And if we could just ask any of you to ask questions through Teams, anybody in the audience, so that we can re-ask the questions and everybody in the live stream can hear. Okay, so we're going to start with a few facts from some publications, and maybe what we'll do is talk through what our journeys were into the world of data, and we're going to pose a few questions, some of which might be a little bit contentious. So from a government report, almost half of businesses in the UK are recruiting for roles that require hard data skills, but half of those have struggled to be able to recruit in the last year. So I guess it really opens up this idea of where are all the data engineers. So Victoria, why don't you tell us your journey into data, what you do day to day?
I came from an interesting background, from a DBA background, and could see sort of things sort of migrating and things, and obviously wanted to move into the data world because as the sort of like the cloud sort of like becomes more and more prevalent, I think some of the sort of like data DBA skills are becoming more and more automated. So yeah, started on that journey into sort of cloud and then migrating obviously to work on a Hortonworks platform sort of for 3 years, working in sort of a big data. It's completely different from working in a DBA background. And yeah, and I think the lot of difficulty is obviously there is like vast amounts of information to learn when you move from one skill to another, and it takes like maybe two years to get a really good grounding before you then start fairly going forward again. You start sort of like going backwards a bit, and it's quite difficult, I think, for people to sort of like say, well, I need to actually change from where I am now into this new sort of skilling platform, isn't it? So, and then sort of moved on from that, and then seeing all the problems and challenges with the big data, which when you start bringing up comparisons between that and obviously like managing sort of like SQL Server and things like that. And then you kind of see, well, we've still really got this big problem, which is all about governance and how we govern those kind of things. And it's really exacerbated when you're trying to look at that on a big data platform. So yeah, so now I'm working with data governance, looking at Microsoft Purview and how we can sort of help customers sort of get that really good data quality and moving that forward. But I think the really big thing that I've taken from this, it's a massive learning step all the time as you go through. And I think that people think, oh, well, you've got to migrate, haven't you? It's like you have to start again, learning all of those skills from sort of scratch, more or less, to move in. And I think it's because the pace of change is so much, it's really, really hard for people to actually sort of like change and move into that sort of platform and things. So
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really interesting movement from the world of a DBA into the world of a sort of hybrid SQL professional programmer. I remember with my own background, I used to build I used to build end-tier applications, and I remember speaking to a friend of mine when I had a problem to optimize a stored procedure, and they managed to take my stored procedure runtime, execution time, down from several minutes to a few seconds with just a few strokes of the keyboard. How did you find that, having that understanding of SQL, where you really have to optimize, you have to understand how SQL works, how query plans, how it executes, and understand that programming model and the internals of SQL to really get the best out of it? How did you find that all those skills moving into the world of big data?
Well, from the SQL side of things, I learned all my skills, obviously attending conferences such as like SQL Bits and things like that. But then moving into that big data area, I found was really difficult. There's like open source, no documentation, really struggled. And that's what takes so long to upskill, because there wasn't that level a few years ago of like documentation. I mean, now you can kind of see like there's lots of different kind of platforms for learning in that big data as sort of different techs sort of evolved and things like that. But it's just like read, and more read. And then, but now obviously there's loads more interactive sort of like videos and things, which is much helping that way. But I think for us to help with those data engineers, we really need to kind of like help people down those paths and take learning paths and things. And Microsoft Learn is doing a really good job now with helping people sort of like take that sort of like breadth of information forward for us to sort of skill really. So.
Yeah, but I think it's for we've question.
Got questions already. Kerry is asking on the chat, everyone has a different definition of a data engineer. What is your definition? How is it different compared to a traditional BI or data science role?
I think this is where you ask a question to different people and you get completely different answers. You're right.
Yes.
I suppose for myself, I came from more of a distributed computing background, so I understood the fundamentals of HPC. So when I saw Hadoop, it was something that I could do, and I had to learn about data and learn about how to partition. Understanding things like shuffles and sorts across the network, and to me, all of that optimization I'd learned earlier. I learned from different types of distributed computing and just applied it to data. So for me, I think programming skills in a data engineer are fundamental. Whilst all the modern frameworks now support ANSI standard SQL, Spark SQL, I think really getting a good understanding of how things work under the covers. And just to respond to Victoria's point, well, one of the things that I did in early versions of Spark was to look at the source code, to contribute bits and pieces where I could, even if it was documentation, just to try to understand what Spark did, all of the various components, and it makes you use the framework better. But interested, coming from a DBA perspective, how you see that data engineer definition?
Well, I see the biggest change that I saw was it's like starting that whole ETL pipeline process and how you actually go about build that, and moving from sort of like SQL Server to big data. It was about like building really scalable platforms which have actually got data quality inbuilt those, so they all lands actually in the lake in a really good sort of like state. But yeah, it's a lot more programming, and obviously use the different tools and things like NiFi and that kind of stuff sort of on the data engineering side of things. So
another question. Somebody's asking, what skill sets do I need to upgrade from a data analyst to a data engineer? And is there a difference between a cloud engineer and a data engineer? Is it possible to do both?
I think that's a really good question, and the title of this was very loaded, because I feel that to be a data engineer, you need very broad skills. And I think in terms of how we run our teams, we make sure that people understand the operations side, so that they understand how to get data engineering pipelines into production, right, and what the difference is between environments, because it always causes a problem at exactly the wrong time. So I think from the sort of fundamentals of DevOps to the fundamentals of building software on the data acquisition side, where you can scale that data acquisition, and in Azure, that might be understanding of Azure functions and high performance and scale out patterns within Azure functions. The platform piece, so to try to understand more about ETL and what the impact is of the cloud on ETL. Is it ETL? Is it ELT? And then how to scale that layer as well, because just thinking about platform frameworks is not enough. You need to understand the inner workings of them, because everything in the cloud runs on compute, and compute is finite. Okay, so understanding scale for me at every single level is really important in the role of a data engineer. And so to go from an analyst, analyst skills are very fine-tuned, they're very mathematical. So I think you start with programming, you understand deployments at cloud scale, and I think that will progress you really well as a data engineer.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think that as well, from that analyst point as well, you're thinking a bit more about like that end kind of goal as well, where you're trying to get to with that business value and what actually the customers are wanting. So you still need to think about that when you're building your pipelines and things as well. So it sort of needs quite an holistic set of skills to be able to get there.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really interests me, and it goes back to this loaded question. Well, all of the cloud and data engineers just aren't here. There's a huge deficit of skills in the market at the moment, and a lot of businesses are struggling to recruit. They're also struggling to initiate a change and be able to move into the cloud and build out a data platform. So I think it's happy time for a lot of external consultants and consultancies. And what you would normally see is a lot more people transitioning from either .NET background or a Java background, and really beginning to embed and understand these skills. So I guess I'm really curious to understand why there aren't enough of them now, given the demand.
Well, I suppose things have changed, haven't they? And data wasn't really important, was it, earlier on? And now people think, oh, we can do this with data and help the business move with that. So I think we've got to help with that data culture within a business, and then being able to help saying, well, there are these openings, and and help sort of like employees sort of like migrate through and actually gain those sort of skills. So, and show them the paths and help sort of like transition people in, because I think we've really got to think about, well, what about getting apprenticeships and try to kind of like encourage people starting out in their career to come and take a career in data. And then I think sort of it will sort of like work through. But at the moment, yes, just sort of coming in with that data engineering stack, you just can't start there, can you? You've got to sort of start from the beginning, really. So.
That's right. I also think the pandemic and the idea that many companies brought forward this data transformation or digital transformation is really important here, because from my view and some of the customers that I've spoken with, they've literally changed their strategy and brought it forward as a result of a global event by 2 to 3 years. And so the market's still playing catch up. You know, we've got amazing resources now that weren't even there a year ago. So if you were new from university, where would you start today? What would you advise a university graduate in terms of the resources and how to begin their career if they wanted to be a data engineer?
I think you've got to start by sort of building up a small sort of program from building blocks, starting with sort of that cloud, learning the basic cloud skills, and then taking some of the basic sort of engineering models on sort of Microsoft Learn. But you need to build sort of like a path sort of through that. And I mean, there are sort of paths that have already been created and things. And I think it's trying to get people on those paths and sort of, and it's encouraging people to try and sort of migrate into that new sort of area and things, and show them how that will help them in business and things. And I think because I suppose like a lot of management within businesses and things are only now really realizing this, they need to help sort of like, oh, well, we'll take some people to help them sort of migrate into this new world. So I think it's not just about people learning those sort of new skills, is it? It's about also business enabling sort of the people coming through to sort of choose that as a path for a career.
Yeah, I think that's really important as well. And you know, increasingly we're having this difference in definition between learning and training and upskilling. So do you think businesses are actually doing enough at the moment to bring more and more people into data engineering? Do they even have the means to be able to do this? Enough senior people?
I think it's a work in progress, and I think there needs to be more to help business leaders understand what is required to help sort of utilize that massive asset. I mean, I think there's a lot out there, isn't there, with all this data around. People are now gradually getting that message about, well, we need to utilize that. But it's not about just, I suppose, getting like consultancies to help, because we need to enable other companies to sort of move forward. So it's as much sort of our role to try and help other companies learn as they go on that journey, really, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think one of the things that I've noticed is that it's actually becoming more and more expensive to even have a data strategy. Obviously with not having a glut of data professionals now, and not having a glut of data engineers, You know, market prices are high for you know, for very, very strong individuals with strong skills. Does this cut out a lot of smaller businesses who might not be able to afford a data strategy? And how in this economy, right, where everybody says that the data is the lifeblood of business, right? How should they be reacting? How should they be tuning their data strategy with maybe not being able to afford as many senior people on projects?
I think you need to really tune it down to thinking about business use cases. So then you say, well, we need to do this, and what do we need to actually achieve that, rather than think of the whole business, because it's huge, isn't it? And people can't kind of like say, well, we need a data engineer, we need a data scientist, and where to get those kind of skills. Even retraining like a data scientist from sort of like data analysts is like huge, isn't it? Because it's so different. And I just kind of think that you've got to just tackle it one small step at a time. And I think that, yeah, you could maybe get help with sort of like those first engineering steps to help forward, but really small businesses are, I think it's hard to get onto that sort of next step with, as we're seeing sort of things may become easier for sort of end users to kind of use some of the tools and things as well. Maybe some of the in-depth stuff won't be required for some of that high level things to help you move along on that path. But I think it's, yeah, it's just that learning journey, isn't it, really? So, but yeah.
It's not an easy one, is it?
No.
So, oh, we've got some more questions.
Yeah, so we have a question from Paul, who's asking, part of the theory of data mesh architecture suggests reduction on the dependency of specialized skills like data engineers. Do you think this is realistic, and should the answer to human skill set bottlenecks be abstraction?
This is a
Tricky
contentious question.
Yes.
Yeah. After you.
I think the way to sort of upskill is definitely going to be to abstract away from all that real technical sort of layer. But yeah, that's a very difficult question to answer at the moment, isn't it, as to how one would go forward with that.
Yeah, so I think data mesh is a very, very early stage, and there are not a lot of businesses that have successfully put this in place. Arguably, it might be no businesses. I think the theory is sound, coming from an original paper that ThoughtWorks developed. But again, it's one of these topologies, right? That is that the enterprise is going to be using, because it's meant for distributed storage, being able to take away common patterns like ingestion into a data lake, having central governance, so that you don't have to do this at all points in the business. And I think that to Victoria's point, it takes it. When you deal with these architectures, right, you start thinking about everything bottom up and not top down.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't become use case driven. So I think even though the theory is sound, I would question that developers probably don't want all of these frameworks, because they like to write a lot of this stuff themselves. And I think that, all through my career, I've seen a lot of this model-based lock-in stuff where I've been forced to use libraries or things that are, the one company or another that I've worked for has insisted that we use, whether it's logging frameworks or something else, and they'll go out of fashion within a year or two. So I think we still have to see whether or not these at-scale methodologies in data are actually here to stay. Okay, so we have to focus where we're at. We've got a set of statistics across the landscape for software engineering and data engineering, and you can see here that in this CNBC report, in the US there are 920,000 unfilled positions with only 165,000 potential applicants, just to really focus on the scale of the problem. And I think this really brings this home. Typically, there are about 500,000 job openings for software engineers at any point in time. And given that universities are only graduating around 50,000 computer science students a year, it would take 10 years to fill all the available software engineer jobs.
That's a long time, isn't it?
It's crazy, isn't it? When you look at these statistics, you can really begin to understand why there's such a shortage of talent.
Yeah, and I think you have to think about, well, apprenticeship schemes and things, don't you, to try and see how else can we actually like start to fill that in and look at roles that definitely maybe haven't even come through like the university traditional routes that maybe you and I have done. And it's a whole different ball game to sort of migrate into this new world, isn't it? So
It is really interesting. And do you think that a lot of the learning providers are doing enough at the level of foundational degrees, where where young students don't choose to go to university? Is there enough directed course content to upskill them rather than just learn a curriculum?
I haven't sort of looked at that sort of level right at that very, very beginning level to take people right from the earlier level straight forward. If you're coming in sort of like me and a bit later on and you may have done some other things, there's plenty of skills, but I still think it's quite hard for people to think, oh, well, yes, I want to move into that skill. And we've got like this thing as well. You might kind of think, well, as well, like for myself, it's like trying to get females and other sort of people within that sort of skill set thing. It's quite hard to sort of make that choice that you actually want to go into that. So you need to make it sort of see, well, why are we doing this and what is that's helping? And I think I always like to still always think, well, to help from the business and things, because people will think, oh, I want to go into work for this type of business and things, rather than, oh, I need to have this tech skill, don't they?
Yeah.
So I think it's like how that's sort of shown when people are recruiting in all the recruitment fairs and things, and how that will actually help the business sort of move forward.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting, and I think that one of the observations that I've had is that you get far more diverse candidates pre-university if you're focusing on STEM
Yeah.
than you do post-university. Um, so so we've got another statistics here about the growth rate, 26% per annum. So this is a moving target as well. We've got some interesting statistics from 2020 from Ori Raphael, the CEO of Upsolver, and here we've got some comparisons which we can look at around data engineering, data science, big data engineering, which is allegedly different from data engineering, and web development and marketing managers. And if you look at the number of candidates for these open positions, it's absolutely crazy, isn't it?
Yes.
The difference.
Which I don't kind of quite see. So it looks like, yeah, we've got like loads more candidates for each sort of sets of positions, which I'm quite surprised because like obviously things like data scientists, you'd expect there to be less people applying for that because like from that data scientist role, obviously you've required to have done lots of upskilling. I know a lot of people coming out of university with that sort of like development sort of skill set now, aren't they?
Yeah,
But
that's right.
but yeah, it's yeah, it makes it hard for people to think, oh, well, you would want to get into that sort of like roles and things. So I think thinking about that, like engineering and starting with those sort of like analysts and sort of things using Power BI and things like that are a really great way to sort of like get people sort of like moving into that. Maybe something that's not like a dedicated like data engineer or data science skills and things, but I think it's like the businesses as well haven't kind of like worked out, oh, well, they really need to have more of this, don't they? Maybe a bit more hybrid roles, maybe, or something for like to fill those so that it sort of expands out then, doesn't it? The number of offerings from business.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think you also hit on a good point that I've noticed, which is that if you start with Power BI visualizations for people that haven't really got a reference point in data, that are graduates, then it makes them more well-rounded because they begin to understand data from the top down rather than the bottom up.
Yeah.
So we have a question here. How should someone differentiate themselves in a hyper-competitive market?
Oh, that is like difficult, isn't it? But I think you need to have on-trend skills, don't you? Because people are always looking for those kind of sort of particular skill levels. So that's how I kind of thought. Well, I thought technology is moving on, so thinking, well, what's the latest newest technology, and then skill for that, and always look ahead and see what's coming. I mean, there's plenty of ways of finding out what's coming, even like Microsoft do lots of kind of things. But I mean, I came from, obviously, I did a research PhD as well, looking at database systems. So also you can even read the research journals and things like that, and even some of the big data platform things, you can read about it there. So you can kind of see really where sort of the technology is going. But that's the main thing, isn't it? Just to keep ahead of the game always, to make yourself really market ready.
Yeah, definitely.
So I actually have a question with regards to these statistics. Do you think that given some of the generational trends around kind of younger generations wanting to have more fulfilling careers and working on things that are solving some of the most important challenges within our society, do you think these kind of statistics are representative of kind of every industry, or what do you imagine the industry split would look like?
Another contentious question, I think, because it it really it will really expose which businesses we think are investing and which aren't. I think one of the questions that I will answer is that this changeover between data science and data engineering is really fascinating, and I think that a lot of businesses have been tripped up by the fact that they can just do data science. And so you've had an entire generation of university students, and all of them want to change the world, do data science. They've all done their dissertations, thesis in data science, until they find out that it's actually quite difficult to do without data. And so I think you've had this shift over the last couple of years where people realize that they've got to put the building blocks of data in place. And you have, especially with the uni students, right, you have to explain to them what a data engineer is, you know, and they get confused because they think that data engineering is a function of data science.
Yeah, and it's not at all, is it? Data engineering does that beginning bit before you get to the data science. But then that's why I focus on data governance, because you can't do anything without that. It's the core bit. And I think that that's where we need to fix that. Then all of our jobs are going to be a lot easier going forward. So.
And do you think, I mean, obviously you're a data architect, strategist, a governance expert. So there's a lot of roles now that are emerging in data, which businesses are beginning to understand. How much more can we do with universities to help them understand all the possible career paths in data?
I mean, maybe we ought to start sort of like helping with sort of like blogs and sort of like trying to educate and get involved more with universities, engineering programs and things, to sort of help put an industry spin on things. So.
Well, students love hacks, so maybe that's a good
Yeah,
start.
maybe. Yeah, lots of freebies as well.
Sorry. When we're edging this.
Sorry about that. Just going back to education, sort of what if someone wants to get into data engineering, are we actually working with government to sort of change policy at education level? When you become a professional footballer, you start at 6, and you're a professional footballer by the time you're 16.
Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot. The government has released a whole load of data strategy, data governance, data quality frameworks and things to how and reskill. And there is an office in for data within the UK now. So I think things are starting to move that way with sort of programs and things.
I think that's a great point. I was running a code club, and you know, it's community support, it's not government support. So the government really doesn't prop up younger children. There needs to be a lot more done in this area.
So I think we're out of time now. Yes. So thank you ever so much for attending our session, and we've had a great time.
Absolutely.
And hope